I know the title says I know the title says surviving and thriving, but as we move throughout the day, I just want to give you a brief heads up. This is an introspective learning process. So we're going to be examining pieces that we possibly haven't even paid attention to within ourselves as we move through today's session. So we want to get out of the surviving, and we really want to move into the space of being able to thrive, being able to win, and truly take care of ourselves as we service the students that we work with day in and day out. So I want to bring our attention to the right side of the screen before I even start to carve this thing out for the day. And I want to look at just the quote that exists there. We can't control what is happening to us and around us, but we can control how we respond to it. And as we move throughout today's session, we're going to be directly focused on the choices or decisions that we make in the face of the things that are causing us the most stress. That's what we're going to be focused on today. And it is going to get a little technical, but it's going to be more about you, more about your journey, and less about me, because we really want to bring those pieces to the forefront to ensure that we can really get to this place of thriving. So just a brief agenda and overview for today. It's going to be broken down into 4 parts. We're going to start with an inclusion activity to bring everybody to the same page, to get those gears turning as we think about this concept of wellness. Once we leave the inclusion activity, then we're going to start to build out knowledge. This is where the introspective piece is going to happen for the day. And when I talk about building out knowledge, I'm talking about, yes, we're going to be looking at some data, but we're going to put that data next to what we already know about ourselves and our personal practices. So today is that moment. And very often we don't get the opportunity to be selfish as teachers. We can't necessarily focus on the I, but today is the moment for you to think about the me, to think about the I. We're not thinking about we, we're not thinking about us. We're only thinking about ourselves as individuals. And once we leave that building knowledge sector, the next piece that we're going to get into is identifying the opportunity. So once we've already pulled those pieces apart, once we've already examined, well, what is it inside of me? The next thing that we're going to talk about is, well, how do we develop healthy practices to respond to the things that are taking place? And we'll talk a little bit about the social emotional learning aspect of that process. And then the last thing is just adding some new practices to support these social emotional competencies that we're talking about today on this call. And I want to be honest with you before we even begin. When we talk about engaging in these practices, some of us already know how to do them, but we just want to highlight how important it is to take that time out to take care of self. And I'm going to quote Lauryn Hill here: we can't win if we're not right within. So if we want to move those students to the next level, if we're pushing the concept of social emotional learning to them, then what are we doing to take care of ourselves so we can sustain this fight, so we can sustain and last not only to the end of the school year, but just ultimately as long as we want to last inside of the education ecosystem. So this deck is built out with 6 elements of success. But today we're going to be directly focused on the concept of ongoing professional learning and equity as a mindset. And I want to highlight the concept of equity here, primarily because equity is need-based. So when I say we're focused on I can't give you resources on today's call and say, hey, this is going to work the best for every single person in here. There's a need that each and every single one of us have. And sometimes it's uniquely different than anything else that's going on around us. So I really, really, really want to focus on the equity as a mindset piece, knowing and understanding that, hey, I got to take care of myself if you truly want this work to be done in a way in which you imagine it to be done. So I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to slow this down a little bit. I know I did a lot of talking on the front end, but I want to give us an opportunity to start that introspective piece, to start to examine the pieces of ourselves that we possibly moved to the side and we haven't thought about, because we've been so focused on ensuring that work happens. We've been so focused on ensuring that we put everybody else before ourselves, but we haven't necessarily thought about, well, what is it that I need? So we're going to go through this inclusion activity, and this is going to be really simple. We're going to exist for the next 5 minutes, and I'm going to show you 2 different screens. And what we're going to do is, on the screen in front of us, you see a couple of inventory items. And the thing that's special about inventory is you're checking to see what things are there, what things are not, how many you have left, or how many you need to get. So what we're going to do right here is we're going to go through a self-care inventory. All right, and we're just going to take some time and respond to the questions. You can write them down on a sheet of paper. You don't have to write them in the chat. You can write them on your phone. You can take a mental note. However it is you want this next part to happen, please feel free to make it happen that way. So there are 5 sections on this first one, and we just want you to rate yourself. We'll take 2 minutes on this slide, just rating ourselves. Top of the 2 minutes, I'm going to show you the next slide. We're going to do the exact same thing. And then we're going to come back and talk a little bit about, well, what exactly was going through our minds in this process. So we'll take 2 minutes here, and I'll show you the next one in 2 minutes. All right, here we go. I'm going to change the slide, and we're going to move to the second set of questions. It'll take about 2 more minutes, and then we'll come back together and talk about some of the things that we're noticing about our pattern in answering these questions. So coming back together, and I know this seems very early to open the floor for conversation, but I want to start to build out this collaborative space between us on this call today. And so if you've been to one of these sessions, you know that we don't have to use the participant feature. But what I would like to happen is, if you are willing to talk, if you're willing to share, if you're willing to include your voice in this space, just wait a little bit. And if it's quiet, then it's your opportunity to dive into the conversation. So I have one question, and it's very simple. I'm just looking for general thoughts and reactions to the inventory. What did you notice about the way that you were responding? And we can keep it there and just expand on that, however far that goes. And then once we get to a good place in conversation, then I'm going to move into the more technical side of today. But we're going to keep circling around this concept of, well, what's going on inside of me as I think through the concept of surviving and thriving. So I'm going to pause here, and I'm going to open the floor for anyone who's willing to jump into the conversation. General thoughts and reactions. Talk to me. What are you thinking? What are you feeling?
Good afternoon. It's morning. I'm sorry. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I don't know if you all can hear me. I am Sandra Ledbetter from Little Rock. One thing that I just noticed where on the second part where you says balance my caseload so that no single day or part of the day is too much. I went to a PBIS conference and I tried this all last week and it worked. And it says you only have one number one. So what I have started doing is before the end of the day, I would choose what my number one is going to be the next day. And that's what I focus on. And it stops me and it helped me from being all over the place, so much chaos. So just having that balance and just focusing on one thing to help me throughout the day, because it's so much that we got going on. So just to see that part there has really helped me to continue to do what I'm doing.
1000%, Sandra. I appreciate you being the first one going ahead and breaking that ice. And I want to pull something out because we're gonna be using that same word as we move in this presentation. I heard the word balance in the last part of your statement, right? The choices that you make directly aligning with creating some sort of balance for you, especially in a world where you're being pulled every which way. And so we're going to be talking through balance. And Sandra, thank you for pouring that into the conversation, because that is one of the tenets that we're going to be discussing today. I'm looking for two more people to hop in. General thoughts and reactions. Talk to me. What are you thinking? How are you feeling?
Well, this is Beverly from South Carolina. As I was completing the self-care assessment, what I realized is that I'm pretty good at looking out for me. The busyness of the day, and it can get very busy and hectic at school, I always find time to come back to me. That's my mental health, my physical health, emotional health, mental, whatever chaos is going on down the hallway, taking care of it. But I'm also remembering that I'm important as well. Not picking up and carrying any of this at home. And yes, I'm very concerned about the students, very concerned about the faculty and staff. But at the end of the day, I can't carry the baggage home with me. So when I'm finished at school, I'm finished at school. I resolve that there are some things that I will take home, and whatever that task is, I'm going home, taking care of it, but I'm going to get my porch time. And that's where I sit on the swing and enjoy the traffic and the crickets and the birds and whatever the case may be. I'm going to enjoy my dog time or my garden time, because again, it's just me. And we can try to save everyone, but it's impossible. We just have to resolve how we're going to do it, who is savable, who really wants to be saved, and we're going to have to work from there. But just going through the self-care assessment, I resolved that, yes, Beverly is moving away from trying to solve everybody's problems to solving that I can solve, helping where I can help. But at the end of the day, I have to remember that my sanity is important as well.
Yeah, that's a bar. That's a bar. I see Sherry with the snaps. I almost just want to stop the call right here. I feel like that's the entire thing. And so I love the idea of, yeah, I care about the students. I care about what's going on at the school. I care about everything that's happening in my school ecosystem. But at the end of the day, I also care about me too, right? And I'm just me. I like that last part too. I'm just me. And so I want to move into this next piece with that notion of I'm just me, and thinking through, well, what exactly does that look like for those of us on this call who may struggle with that, and for those of us who are trying to figure out, well, how do I get to that level of release? Because I know for me, as a first year teacher, I was taking everything home. Like, my time was wrapped in, my life was school. And I really struggled to get to this piece of, how do I separate that to enjoy my life? So we're going to be moving through those pieces. And Beverly, thanks for the beautiful segue into this next part of today. And I'm sure I would love to double back and ask you for tips once we get to that place in today's session. So what I want to do right now is I want to talk through building some knowledge. This is the second piece of today. And if you have notes on your personal self-care assessment, please hold those tight. And if you didn't have an opportunity to speak, just think through what you had down on yours as we move throughout today's presentation. So I want to start here. And I want to say first that very often in schools, especially in these days, there's a really large focus on social emotional learning. And we explicitly and implicitly teach this to our students, right? We push this very hard, the concept of understanding and managing emotions, setting and achieving positive goals, feeling and showing empathy for others, establishing and maintaining positive relationships, and making responsible decisions. But on the back end, when we think to ourselves, well, how many of us are actually practicing this as an adult? How many of us are actually adding social and emotional learning to ourselves? And I want to be very clear right now, the same way in which we teach students is the same way that we learn as adults. It's a practice. It's just like going to the gym with more repetitions, more reps, constantly progressive overload. As time moves, you start to increase the weight and you realize I can lift more. But when it comes to social emotional learning, if we're not practicing it, if we're not repping it, if we're not progressively adding more to figure out, well, what exactly can I do? If we're not training our minds to think in this way, then the concept of SEL seems a little redundant. So as we move throughout this next piece, and I know I keep saying that, as we move, we're going to dive deeper into what it looks like to train the muscle to think in this way, what it looks like to practice and move through in repetition in adopting adult social and emotional learning, so that the things that we're giving to our students, we're practicing those things so that we can stay healthy. Again, going back to Beverly's point, I'm just me. Or even thinking about Sandra's point, there has to be some sort of balance in the way in which we operate, not only inside of our classrooms, but just in the grander scheme of what our life is. So I want to pause right here. I want to give you an opportunity, if you haven't already, we'll take just about 20 seconds. If you want to read the screen, I want to give you that chance to check it out. And then I'm going to move forward with the next part of today. And once you've read the screen and you're locked in and ready to go, if you drop the number 1 in the chat, I know you're ready to move. There it is. So what does the research say? I'm going to take some time here. And I'm going to yield my time and kick it over to Sherry. But when we think about the number one causes or the reasons why teachers are burning out, and we don't have enough time to truly dive into this piece, but there was a study that came out, one in which is going to be in this article, another one in which I'm going to pull from another presentation, that across the workforce, especially after the pandemic, the number one thing that was causing people to leave professions such as teaching was the idea of stress. And I'm sure we could all recall the moment where we either saw in the news, we got the text message, we got the email, where everything just shifted. The world in which we knew education to be completely dissolved and changed right in front of us. And for a lot of us, we weren't ready for that change. And for a lot of us, we were moving back into situations where it wasn't as much of a utopia as school was. And then we thought, well, if I'm going through this, what exactly are my students going to go through when they lose the support of what physical school gives to those individuals? So there was a survey that went out, 5,000 participants, in their direct response to things that they felt every day. And the things that popped up inside of that survey were teachers felt anxious, teachers felt fearful, teachers were worried, teachers were overwhelmed, sad, and had a buildup of anxiety. And so when we think to ourselves, right, those are real. If I asked everybody to put your hand up, if any of those things resonated with us, I'm almost certain that our hands would start to go in the air as it directly related to the feeling that we had when school shut down and we were forced into situations that we were unfamiliar with and maybe not comfortable with. And those are really big emotions. Those are emotions where we feel as if we have no control about a situation or circumstance. Those are really big things to juggle, not only your personal life, but to still log on every single day and try to put a smile on the face of individuals that we work with day in and day out. And if I asked the question of, well, how many of us actually took time to resolve those emotions as opposed to trucking through the emotions, moving them to the side because you had something larger that you wanted to accomplish, I'm almost certain, and I'll put my hand in the air, I'm almost certain that a lot of us will be able to resonate with that statement as well. So I want to highlight that because those are feelings that we shouldn't walk with, that we shouldn't carry. Because if we keep isolating them, at some point, we're going to grow to resent the things that exist in the shadows. If we haven't illuminated and highlighted, well, how do we think through to make this better for ourselves? So I'm going to pause here, and I'm going to move into another article, and I'm going to kick it over to Sherry to talk about this one.
Yeah, thanks, David, because these two articles that we're looking at here. So we have the first article that's talking about how society has turned its back on mothers. And so how many caregivers do we have out there? Can you put a 1 in the chat? Who's a caregiver out there? Yeah. So it's really talking about how there's so many things that you're struggling with and you're juggling when you are taking care of another human, and how society has these unwritten rules and these expectations that many times make people feel less than, like, I'm not doing enough. Or if you want to feel your own pain, or if you want to really think about yourself or put yourself first, they look at you a certain way, like, you're not being a good mother. And what does that do for you? Or you're not being a good caregiver. And what does that do for you? There's a lot of suffering and silence that's happening for people who are constantly worried about those that they're taking care of. People who are trying to have children who cannot. People who are just struggling in so many ways internally, and they're not allowed to really voice that in a way where people can understand you. If you try to voice it to someone else, they'll say, oh, well, I did this, and this. And what does that do for us? And then another article that really connects is this idea of compassion fatigue. Especially if you're working in the social services and in the human development industry, like education, where we're doing so much to build up someone else. But what about that emotional labor that is taking that toll on us? And we're trying so much to give to other people. But then I think, and I go back to what Beverly said, and she's talking about the fact that she can't carry that baggage with her. It's almost like you have to brace yourself to save yourself in order to continue to do this work and to help other people. But the first rule of thumb is that you have to survive yourself in order to do that. And so I really appreciate what Beverly brought to that. And also, I really appreciate what Sandra brought too, about really focusing on what's that one thing that you can focus on, because if everything is important, nothing is, right? And so we're really just wanting to give ourselves that grace and understand that when we take care of ourselves, we'll be able to have something left over to take care of others with, but we can't pour from an empty cup. So as we move on and we're looking at how is this showing up in an education environment. So when we talk about teachers specifically, we're talking about that there's all these ways that stress is showing up, the way that the school is organized, the way the school day is organized and the schedule, and not being able to connect with colleagues like you would like, or not even being able to use the washroom at the times that you need to use the washroom, your own biological concerns, the demands of the job, work resources. They say a lot of times when you have a willingness to do something and you have the ability to do something, but you don't have the resources to do something, that's where frustration comes in. And that's what a lot of people deal with when they're trying to create those resources for the students in front of them. Another piece too is just really, really thinking about how these social emotional competencies, and is anyone familiar with emotional intelligence? Put a 1 in the chat if you are. Emotional intelligence is the same thing as social emotional learning. It's literally those are the same tenets. That's where social emotional learning built its work off of, is emotional intelligence. So a lot of times when, I don't know for if it's for you, but for me, when I think of emotional intelligence, or social emotional learning, somehow in my brain, I put that with the students, but that's for us because that is the way our brains work. We don't grow out of the way that our brains work. And we'll look more into that in a little bit. So thank you for that. And I'll kick it back to David.
All right. So as we move forward, we just want to take a quick pulse check to see how we're doing. We can do this one or two ways, just because I know it's been a lot of Sherry and I. You can either use the chat to respond to any one of the, to check in, to let us know where you are on this target, or if you would like to, in the next minute, the floor is open for anybody who wants to share again, general thoughts or reactions, some things that you might still be circling around, or even if you wanted to just drop a little nugget in, how are you taking care of yourself? Again, we can use the chat box to respond to the prompt on the screen in front of us, or in this next minute, feel free to come off mute and just drop something into the atmosphere.
I'd like to contribute because my name is Tamara Campbell. I'm in Phoenix. And when I'm looking at this, I think, yeah, I hit the bullseye. I have this conversation with teachers a lot about the balance and the importance of it. But putting it in practice for myself is a lot more difficult. And I'll walk them through the process and talk to them about the importance of it. But I don't necessarily practice what I preach. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And thanks for being vulnerable and sharing that, right? And it's almost a streamline, because when you walk your teachers through the process of self-care, and you're trying to ensure, hey, you need to take care of yourself. Then on the back end, we're seeing teachers do the exact same thing when the way in which they handle their students, but then they're not taking care of themselves. But as we move through, what I want to do, we're gonna move through these next couple pieces a little faster, because I want to get to those small nuggets that you could possibly use for yourself. Then I think it goes into this accountability piece, right? Because if I continue to empty the things that I have inside for the individuals that I'm serving, then what am I bringing back to my household? What am I bringing back to my community? Or what am I bringing back to my loved ones? And if I'm being pulled every single direction, and I can't imagine to live a long, healthy, and sustainable life. So thanks for pointing that into the conversation. I'm going to do my best to get to the what can I do? Because I think that's the reason why a lot of us are here. So we got just about 20 seconds for anybody that wants to pour into the conversation. And I see the twos are rolling into the chat box. 20 more seconds for anybody who wants to pour into conversation. There it is. So now we're going to move into, and it's almost like Tamara saw what was coming next. And now we're going to move into being able to identify the opportunities in the midst of pouring into other people, in the midst of helping others. How do I take a step back and say, well, I need to help and serve myself? So we're going to start with some technical stuff that Sherry is very well versed at, that I am not. So I'm going to kick it back over to Sherry, and I'll come back on the back end to talk about some of the other stuff.
Yeah, and I really want to shout out Dr. Tamara, because I think that piece is huge for people who are educators. We're well educated, and we know what it means. We know what to do, but doing it, I used to be a personal trainer. I know what to do, but doing it is something different. And so when we're talking about our emotions and things like that, we can't really look at it without looking at the science of the brain and how the brain works. So I know a lot of us know about fight or flight, but what they're not really telling us, or what they don't really discuss, is what happens a little bit deeper than that. So we have these parts of our brain, and we have something called our limbic system in the middle of our brain, where we see that image there. It has the amygdala in there and the hippocampus. The hippocampus is that's where the learning takes part and the memory takes part in the brain. And the amygdala it's like a guard dog or someone on the watch. The amygdala is a part of the brain that serves as a siren for your body. And it looks around and it's scanning for threats. It's scanning for things and situations. Do we hate this? Is this going to bring us pain? Is this going to hurt us? And what it does is, once it sounds its alarm, it allows your limbic system, that's the emotional part of the brain, to take over the rest of your brain. So the front of your brain up there, where we see an image of the prefrontal cortex, that is, that's where your reasoning, that's your reasoning center. And that's where, going back to what Dr. Tamara was talking about, where we know better, we know what the science of it and what it means. But when there is some sort of a threat, our limbic system shuts down the reasoning part so that we can act first. For instance, there'll be situations where people who are exposed to something that could make them allergic, their body will start to react in 12 milliseconds. And because you have to act first, talk about it later. When it comes to a threat, those milliseconds can be what saves you. And so the thing is, beforehand, a lot of our threats were physical, but today our threats are psychological. Did someone just do something that was going to threaten my reputation? Did someone just say something to challenge my character or my power, to make me look like I don't have authority in this situation? Is this going to have implications for my job? Am I going to be on the streets next? Our amygdala goes into play and takes over. And for us, we have to not only recognize that in ourselves, but others. That's called an emotional hijacking. That's what that's called, because your brain is literally locked down in order to survive. So when you start to feel that in yourself, what is it for you? For me, I start feeling my blood starting to boil in my veins, and I get start tight here in my chest. When you start to see that, just know that you're not going to have a reasonable conversation. So we'll look into tools that we can use to be able to help regulate ourselves in that situation. And then also, if someone else is getting there, you know that you can't reason with them at this time. You know, we want to use some of these tools to help us be able to balance those body systems. So yeah, we're going to look into that. And then going to the next piece, we'll just go to the next one. And David, I'm thinking when we go to the next slide, we can really talk about this idea of fear. So we know with fear, that's when our emotional centers takes over and we're not acting in the way that we would like to act or showing up in the way that we would like to show up. But there's another way that we can look at fear. And I'll let David take that away.
For sure. Thanks for that, Sherry. And like I said, the technical side of things, I'll leave that to Sherry any day. But as we transition, the idea of fear, I will never forget. I was sitting in the front row at church, and the pastor said something very interesting. He said both faith and fear have the exact same definition, right? And I'm sure he made it up, but just for the sake of the semantics, it was a beautiful transition. And he said that both faith and fear meant complete trust or confidence that something is going to happen. And when we think about the reason why we fear very often is because we believe that some things are out of our control. And we know the negative, it has potential that something bad is going to happen here. And we want to do everything that we can to escape that. And so as we think through this next piece, we're going to talk through a couple of strategies that acknowledge the fear, all right, acknowledge the fear, face the fear, and then move into this place where, yes, the fear still exists, but how am I making sure, again, here's the management piece that goes into the SEL, how am I making sure that I'm managing that emotion in the correct way, and I'm not allowing the emotion to manage me and the way in which I react and respond to that emotion. The brain itself is a muscle. Just like I was saying before, we can't expect to show up, or we can't expect to get these practices down packed after just trying them for 20 seconds and saying, all right, I think I got the mindfulness done. But the next time fear pops up, all of a sudden we're back into the same shell that we was before. And sometimes that does something to us. When we try it one time, we try meditation and it just doesn't work. We're like, all right, this doesn't work. I'm never trying it. I'm never trying it again. So I want to talk through a couple of strategies. Strategy one is the idea of breathing. And what I've learned, and for the last, I want to say about the last year and a half, I've been really invested in the concept of mindfulness. It's something that the guys back here in Miami, we practice guided meditation and yoga in the morning before we get into the heat of the day. And I've never realized that mindfulness is not the ability to stay focused, it's the ability to come back to focus. So what it is being able to acknowledge the distractions that are happening around me. I'm acknowledging the emotions, the things that are taking place around me, but then I'm able to come back to my main point. And the more we're able to snap into this reflex, the more we're able to come back to focus is how we start to develop the concept of focus, right? Right now, I think the average focus for a child is about 7 seconds. And I think a goldfish is beating a child's focus. So, and I know some of us are shocked, like 7 seconds. So one of the strategies I want to talk through is the concept of breathing. And breathing itself is such a beautiful strategy. And if you're practicing it right now using the shape, that's beautiful. But breathing itself is such an amazing strategy because it not only locks us into taking full control of what's going on inside of us, but when we think about the power associated with being able to control our breath, especially in places where everything else around us is in full stances of chaos, where everything around us, it seems as if we've lost full control. But when we take a couple seconds to just breathe, slow down our heart rate, and think about the fact that you were powerful enough to simply control your breath. And it's said that if we can ride the wave of anger through simply controlling our breath, then we'll avoid 99.9% of impulsive response, right? We ride the wave of anger through breathing. We're not flipping our lid. That's what's happening in the example that Sherry gave. When we flip our lid, right, that's where we respond. The second strategy I want to bring us to is this idea of, again, slowing down and feeling as if we can control the time around us, identifying the emotion. Here's the management piece again inside of the social emotional learning concept, identifying, well, what exactly is the emotion, right? When I feel anxious, right? What does it look like for me when I'm overwhelmed? What does it look like for me? And when you've directly identified what it is, the next piece is coming up with a solution that directly works for you. I'll say that last part again, and this is that equity piece that we were talking about in the beginning of the presentation. You're coming up with a solution that directly works for you. And I'll tell you right now, there's something powerful about not allowing anybody else around you to directly assess what it is you feel. There's been plenty of times where I have not been angry and I have not been frustrated, but I've allowed people around me to tell me exactly what I was in that moment. So I've ended up misdiagnosing myself and saying, well, here's what I can do when I'm angry, when I never assigned that emotion to myself. So
and another thing, David, they say that only 36% of adults can actually name accurately what they're feeling at any moment.
Exactly. And it takes time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It takes time to be able to sit with that emotion, to be able to sit with what you're thinking and what you're feeling, and then you assign it to yourself. And only then can you prescribe what works the best for you. And we know there are some situations, and I want to make that very clear, there are some situations where we don't have the necessary prescription. And that's where self-help wise, we take the step outward to figure out, well, who can help me figure this out? The next strategy, and this is one of my favorite ones, and when I was a middle school teacher, this is something that we really took pride in, is influencing or pushing the concept of gratitude. Now, I remember my students used to always say, they call me Cool Smooth Money Making Jack on Friday. Thursday was Action Jackson. Friday, Cool Smooth Money Making Jack, they used to ask me, well, why do we have to keep giving gratitude? I'm tired of telling people why I'm thankful for them. And I used to sit them down and say, hey, man, there are tons of benefits with just being able to identify the things that are still sweet in the midst of everything that's going on that may be a little sour. So when we think about, well, what it looks like to bring positive psychology, what it looks like to bring positive energy in to combat the negative things that are going on around us, we're talking about gratitude, being able, gratitude can enhance empathy and reduce aggression. Right? Gratitude can improve your sleep. For instance, practicing gratitude regularly can help you sleep a little longer and better. Gratitude can increase mental strength. Again, going back to the concept of training my mind, training my brain, training my imagination, being able to sort through the negative and think to myself, well, what can I give gratitude to, not only for myself, but the things that are going on around me. And there's something powerful about just writing a note to gratitude for not only yourself, but someone else around you who may have possibly helped you through a particular situation or circumstance. But before I move to the next piece, before I move to the call to action, I want to address something very quickly as we motion to the close of our day, when we think about the concept of surviving and thriving, right? And I know a lot of us are still trying to figure out, well, I get it. I know what it is, right? I know what it is. I know how to do it. Like, where's the good stuff? I can guarantee you right now, and I said on this call, put me down on the record, the more we practice the concept of mindfulness, the more we take those small pieces into consideration, the easier it becomes to get to a place where I'm taking advantage of me time, my porch time, my swing time, my gym time, that's a possession thing. The more I train myself to take care of the more I'll start to realize that that positive aura around me shines just a little lighter, because people can see when somebody's putting on the front, when things aren't everything that it seems to be, but you're there, you're trying. But how do we make sure we show up in a space that's deeply positive? So before we leave, I want us to think about these two things. There's a ton of resources in this deck that you have at your disposal. So I want to commit to sharing at least 1 or 2 resources with my community and committing to implementing 1 social emotional learning strategy this week, right? And again, if it doesn't work the first time, don't throw it away. Don't abandon it. Keep trying until something sticks for you, right? Until something sticks for you. And then the last piece, and I'll kick it over to Sherry if she has anything to wrap us up. If we continue to move these pieces away and isolate them, we grow to resent those pieces. And then we're dealing with things that could possibly destroy us. And if it destroys us, then who are we truly good to serve if we allow that to happen? So I'm going to kick it over to Sherry if Sherry has any parting words, and then we'll wrap this thing up.
The only parting words I have is how much power and control that we have when we realize that we're the center of our own universe and our own body. And so really taking that time to honor that and be thankful for who we are is really huge. So thank you for what you shared with us today, David. I really appreciate that.
There it is. And I appreciate everybody being here. Please rate this session in your sketch, feedback, how's the session? And my name was David L. Jackson. Only if you enjoyed the session. If you did not enjoy it, please go ahead. Do not rate the session. Just go ahead and leave it blank. But if you did enjoy it, show us some love. Drop a little 1 or 2 line in there. Let us know how you're thinking and feeling. And I wish you all a very beautiful day. Have a good one, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for being here.